is going on, folks? It is Steiner here with another episode of Secondhand Talent. Thanks, of course, to Luke Chu for the lo-fi. Thanks to Tenacious Toys for the lovely desk candy. And thank you to this week's guest, Asher Fulero. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Heck yeah, it's good to be here.
Well, we are so happy to have you on, and folks, I got to come clean here. Asher is a bit of a first-hand talent, and I got a couple of things to say about this man right here. He has recorded several albums and has toured with Emancipator between 2015 and 2023. He has played with Yonder Mountain String Band over a series of years, including covering several Pink Floyd albums. In 2023, he played keys on 4 songs on Aesop Rock's album, on the officially acclaimed album Integrated Tech Solutions. Between 2013 and 2018, the 5-piece Asher Fulero Band, one of their records of which, Catching Air, is right behind me, toured and played over 150 shows. And this album here was produced in 2015 and officially pressed in 2023. We'll get to that a little bit later. Oh yeah, and he's also composed close to 100 original pieces for YouTube's soundtrack database, and has recorded in remote northern Iceland for 3 weeks with Taiwan artist Joanna Wang. And just to cap it all off, has played many performances over the last 20 years with the Everyone Orchestra. Asher Fulero, Mr. Firsthand Talent here, welcome to the show. Thank you, everyone, for bearing with me on that.
Well, I appreciate it. It's that was a nice intro. The breadth of the resume was always my biggest goal when I first started doing this. So I guess that it's being first-hand talent and second-hand talent, because there's a lot of things to do.
It really is. And honestly, you talk about building a resume, and there is zero padding there. That's it's one of the things that, when I was in college, maybe when you were as well, it was always about padding your resume with what kind of experience can you add on to make it, a little fluffier, a little better. There's all meat on those bones right there. There's no fat to trim anywhere.
I've been very fortunate with friends and gigs and opportunities, and yeah, I think the music scene is like that. If you are passionate and present and active, that there's just a lot of awesome opportunity to be a part of, kind of wherever you.
Yeah, I fully agree. And, real quick before we jump into the technical aspects of it, you and I had met through the Heady Wax Fiends record group, which is the producer of this here record. Rocking the shirt. I love the representation. Shout out to the best place on the internet. And folks, by the way, if the video is a little choppy, that's okay. It's a secondhand podcast, but firsthand content. So when I first reached out to you, or when you first saw rumblings in the group about a podcast called Secondhand Talent, what did you think it was about?
Well, I think that the name made sense to me. I think I saw it and figured it was what that it was this, So it makes a lot of sense. I think you picked a great name.
Thank you. And for those new listeners and reviewers who are unsure what this is, it's where we shine the spotlight on the people who shine the spotlights. We try to interview all of the villagers in the village it takes to create live music. And, Asher, in addition to your illustrious career as a performer, you've done a lot of things behind the scenes, fulfilling different roles as secondhand talent. And I'm really looking forward to getting into the nitty gritty of what some of those are. But before we do, I've listened to a lot of your music. Like one of your albums, Catching Air, I've been listening to for many years, and has been a favorite of mine, and was very glad when the group pressed it.
Yeah,
I'm
thanks.
kind of curious. Hey, but hey, listen, my sincere pleasure. I gotta ask, what were some of your early musical influences that kind of got you rolling down the career path that led you to where you are?
Yeah, I mean, everyone's got them. Like early life for me was, I had, divorced parents that both got remarried. So I sort of had two families. My dad lived in Dayton, Ohio. My mom just outside of Portland in Beaverton. And I don't know. I think there was like music on both sides. My dad was a classic rock and blues junkie, had been going to concerts. He went to Woodstock. He was a professional. He was a lawyer and a psychologist and a professor and a great dude, but loved music, huge record collection. And so he was aggressive about taking me to concerts from a young age. First concert I remember ever seeing was age 7, and he took me to see, uh, you're going to laugh, but it was Cool in the Gang. But
Oh, hell yes. What?
the opener though was Zapp and Roger, which I remember 7 years old just being face melted. But then 2 weeks later, he took us back to the same place and we saw James Taylor and Bonnie Raitt. And then a few weeks later, we went back and we saw Paul Simon. And so it was like, we were kind of like
Wow.
the map. He showed me, he took me to see Curtis Salgado and, um, uh, just an amazing number of shows from my early age. So he was a big influence on me, my dad, the blues and classic rock. But then his wife, my stepmom, she was a classical pianist. And so I heard her playing Beethoven, and I was interested in piano as my older brother had started playing guitar. I got exposed to Pink Floyd when I was probably, third grade. When I started piano lessons, was in third grade. I was already really into music, so music was everywhere. My mom was a school teacher, and so we had a lot of kids music, and there were a lot of folk music. She was really into stuff like Peter, Paul, and Mary, which rubbed off on me. A lot of Pete Seeger, Arlo Guthrie, but then also like Billy Joel. Just like all those classic soft rock folk hits. That was all the early Grateful Dead. All that stuff was getting played around a lot of kids' music. So music was everywhere. We sang 3-part harmony folk songs in the car. We went camping and sang songs around the campfire. And then my older brother, he was already playing guitar and had a band. So music was just everywhere for me. So it was always around. Honestly, it wasn't until I got into music school in college that I ever thought I could have a career performing. I just figured it was going to be something I liked and that I did. But it became apparent that I was able to survive, and so I did it. But initially, that was not my plan. So music was just around and something I loved.
That's really fascinating the way you describe that path because, I kind of had this visual reaction as you were talking some of the things you were saying because, my earliest concert memories were about 7 years old also. And as my dad taking me to go see bands in quick succession, like Backman Turner Overdrive,
Right.
Rare Earth, Blue Oyster Cult, Survivor, and then he was a big Bee Gees fan,
Oh yeah,
and
I got
then
a dad's collection for sure.
from my mom, she was a big Deadhead and Zappa fan, but I also got Carol King and Joni Mitchell and Peter, Paul, and Mary, like you were saying, and Pete Seeger and Bob Dylan and Arlo Guthrie, and it's so amazing to me to hear these, and my dad's sister Sarah was a classical pianist.
Oh,
Um, so it's really just like hearing all of these things. It's like, no wonder you went down the path. No wonder we're both in the music scene.
I think it's nurture. It's like there's nature, but there's also nurture, and like I was nurtured around a music respectful culture in my family culture, and that paid off. I don't know how to put that. Like it wasn't something that I thought maybe I was going to do professionally, but it never occurred to me that like I couldn't do it. Like it always seemed like something that was like you could do, some people could do. And it was just more like I didn't really understand yeah, I don't know how to put this, that like all of the music that I listed that I grew up with, for the most part, is all like within a pretty narrow bandwidth of style. Like I didn't listen to like Indian classical music, and I didn't grow up listening to like world beat, or like it was like much later that I discovered hip hop. Like I grew up with like the blues and soul and classic rock, British stuff and American folk. And that was,
Now, one of the things, of all the bands that I listed before, right? One of the things that wound up being probably the most fortunate in my musical experience growing up was that I just was exposed from an early age and absolutely loved Weird Al.
oh yeah,
And that got me introduced to so many different genres of music that I had never would have otherwise
it didn't
like.
Weird Al for me though. It started with Dr. Demento. I listened to his radio show, and I would tape it on my little radio cassette deck, and I'd make recordings. And I'd listen to them over and over because it was before the internet. If you wanted to hear it again, you just had to tape it. So I have a whole collection of Dr. Demento tapes, and then it turned into a love of Tom Lehrer, and then that turned into a love of Weird Al. And yeah,
That's awesome.
and I would say that like my love of weird music, because I like weird music, that it really came from that. It didn't come from my dad. My dad didn't like weird music. My mom doesn't like weird music. Like my love of weird music came from that early obsession with Dr. Demento and like novelty songs, and then it became like Zappa and Sun Ra and like that kind of stuff. But that all grew from that, we liking things that are weird.
That weirdness is so essential though. So getting back to your musical journey, you realized this was something you could do in college. What was the first experience that you had that was really something that you look back on and were like, oh yeah, okay, this was when I realized, yeah, music is the thing I can do.
I mean, I feel like we could talk about this a long time, but
Sure.
short
Yeah.
version the short version would be that like my second year of music school, you just skipping all the stuff about how I got into like choosing to be in music school instead of whatever else I was doing. Though like once I was in the music school, there's this sort of situation where the first year of classes, they encourage people who are not music students to come and be a part of the music school and like learn about music. And the first year courses are all very inclusive and doable for people who aren't musicians. Day one on the second year, though, they start weeding people out real fast. It gets like 25 times harder on day one of year two. And so it was in year two that I got in. I still was like, well, I did year one, and I was like suddenly getting straight A's. And I was like, this is great. Music works for me. So I'll do year two. But I got into year two and was like, oh, like this is like really hard. And I pushed through, but then by the time I got into year three, I kind of was like, I was looking around and I was like, I made it through, and I see all these people that didn't. I'm like, I'm not like the best guy here, but like I can hang. And so by like year three, I started to have some confidence. And then by the time I graduated, did my thesis and graduated and moved back to Portland from Eugene, like started looking for gigs. That was like when I started realizing like I'm actually a pretty good keyboard player. Like I'm maybe an asset to a band if you can hire me. Like, and I started going from doing, $30 to $50 gigs for anyone that would hire me to switching to more like, you got to pay me $75 to $100 and it's got to be something I want to do. It just turned into like opportunity. Like I said, the more that you're present and enthusiastic and solid, like the more opportunities will show up.
I think that last part of what you said is the most important. Being solid, being reliable, being dependable, showing up for the gig on time,
Yep.
and knowing the assignment.
And just
There
like being interested, being like you want to be there. It's such a big deal.
being Yeah, being present in what you're being hired to do. Yes, it might not be your favorite genre of music. It might not be the best crowd. It might be a corporate gig. But like, if you're doing what you love to do and you're trying to further your career, then an opportunity is an opportunity is an opportunity.
And I would say that like this is how we segue into my secondhand talent work, is that like that's what that was, is sort of a twofold things. Like one is that like doing all the things requires a lot of people, and that's expensive. When you're young or you're not successful, you don't have the access to the means to like hire everyone to do everything, and so then you're just left doing them yourself. And at that point, like you kind of want to like not suck. So at some level, I just started learning how to, learn how to make a press kit, learn how to make sure the band photos look good, learn about formats and delivery, learn about how to contact people at booking agencies. And then that turns into like learning how to promote a show, learning where posters go, who does postering, poster design, the minutia of that. There's, it's like, well, someone's got to like record the show and multi-track it and make sure that the files are okay. And then someone's got to take those files and put them into the DAW and mix them and make a mix. And then someone's got to like take the mix and get it mastered. And then someone's got to like make some artwork and name all the songs. And then someone's got to like get it released. And like, there's like endless steps to all these things. And a lot of people have teams to do all that stuff. But if you don't, you got to just do it. And so that's where like, I think maybe there's more musicians than we realize that are like doing all this stuff.
Well, I love that you ended with that because there are. And if not independent musicians, then certainly bands. And I'm, proud to say that a lot of the bands that we've featured here on Secondhand Talent, like Sickard Hollow and Stormy Cromer, these are bands that are doing it all themselves. They have all of their secondhand talent built in. They're doing their own booking, marketing, merch, everything. Matt Rennick, who was on the show in season 2, from Sickard Hollow, great bluegrass band out of Nashville. As soon as his set was over, they were opening for Kitchen Dwellers here in Chicago. And as soon as the set was over, he was right behind the merch stand,
Yeah.
selling. And I was like, man, I've been there. And I was just impressed. And I asked him to be on the show. I was like, clearly you guys are doing it all on your own.
Yeah.
But those are the bands that we feature, are the ones who, wind up doing it all themselves and do it well. Because you're right, you do want to be able to do it well.
Each thing matters, and there's a reason that there's like the team has a dedicated person for each of those things, because each one has its own minutia and expectations. It's just a lot to deal with.
Oh, absolutely. And I was also going to say, um, twofold. One, for everything that you listed, I'm sure there's someone that we've interviewed who does that. And two, the whole purpose of the show is to highlight not just the people who are on the show, but the fields that they represent. Because in each one of those sectors that you talked about, when it comes to poster, design, mastering, studio work, that for every one representative of each facet we have on the show, there are countless others working in the industry in those capacities, and they all deserve the same shine and attention as whoever happens to be on the show representing that
Yeah.
space.
I think you're doing good work here educating some people, because, I've explained this to people many times that for the most part, the audience doesn't understand the difference between an artist that has a team and one that doesn't, especially if you're not like in person, like at the show. If you're like hearing them on the radio or on Spotify or something, or a friend sends you a thing, you see a video, chances are good that both you heard about it because there was a ad budget spent to advertise to you, and second of all, you heard about it because they targeted you and they found you. So it's almost like I almost want to say, like, unless you hear about a band from a friend, and even when you hear about a band from a friend, chances are they heard about that band from the ad campaign. got paid for. So like, this is the thing, is that, you know, you've got bands that have budget to have ad campaigns, and you've got artists that don't have the budget for that. And the audience doesn't know the difference. They just hear about things, and they find things that they're interested in, and it's so fun. Like, you know, not to digress too much, but the whole concept of the grassroots thing isn't really a thing. Like, you can't have a grassroots campaign without advertising to those grassroots. You can't do something without getting people to hear about it. So there's this whole other side to, like, you can make the best art in the world, but who's going to hear it? How's anyone going to know about it? And that whole side of things is like non-musical talent. It's like all this other stuff that is involved in, and people exist as listeners inside that ecosphere, not knowing at all how it works.
No,
So,
absolutely. And you know what's really interesting is what brought me to that second kitchen. That was the second time I'd ever seen Kitchen Dwellers, and what brought me to that show was something intangible. I was randomly, I got invited to go to Rose on the River, or some Sacred Rose, maybe, I forget the name of it. And I went on Sunday to go see Holly Bowling, who is one of my favorite musicians of all time. I think she's absolutely wonderful. And Kitchen Dwellers played right after, and a lot of people in the Heady Wax Fiends group were talking about them. And I listened to their album, and I was like, okay, they're all right. But the moment I heard them play, because I was there, and they started up Run for the Roses, and I got up out of my chair and said to my wife, "Hon, I'll be right back. I need it." And went to the record shop the next day, my local, shout out Sugar Records, and bought them out of their copies of Wise River. I've been just listening to that band ever since. But you're absolutely right that, people tend to skip that leap in logic, that without the team, it still takes a team.
yeah, it'll be like, I heard about this great band when I saw them at I was at this festival, and there were 80 bands, and I'd never heard of them, and I just happened across their set, and it was amazing. It was like, okay, great, but how did they get at that festival? Like, there's the people don't think about the, like, path.
Absolutely. So you have acutely mentioned that, even when it's just you and you can't afford a team, you have to be that team. So what was the first piece of equipment as a performer that you felt like you had to learn and master to be truly effective from a performance perspective?
Well, I mean, the first thing was the instrument itself, the piano for me. But then, like, after that, it was like, it started with like gig related stuff. So it was like, well, I need keyboard sounds, but I also need them to be loud. So I need an amp. I'm going to need a keyboard stand and something to sit on. Got to learn about pedals. I'm going to need to, like, I don't know how far back to go or how much detail to answer in, but my first instrument was the piano. So, when I started, I wasn't really very good. And I would so maybe age 6, 7, we lived in a place that had this piano in the room that was mine. And so I would wake my parents up just banging on it in the middle of the night. And so once I started taking piano lessons, they were like, okay, we're going to let him play piano all the time, but we're going to protect ourselves by getting a digital piano, like headphones. So they got a digital piano with headphones. And for my first, 3 or 4 years of piano lessons, that was what I practiced on. And then once it became clear that I was like going to be a piano player and I was going to keep doing it, my mom's parents were like, well, let's get him a real piano. So they sent me to the piano shop and let me pick out a piano I liked, which was like, I picked out a Yamaha upright, which they're awesome. And I still have, it's in my living room. And so we brought that home, and that was what I played on for playing piano and for lessons and practicing and stuff. But that digital piano was still there. It was down there in the basement. And when I got a little older and I started having bands, that was what I used. And it was, it was kind of a early device, but it had other sounds. It had some electric pianos and had a really bad organ and, a vibraphone. And I would experiment with different sounds and stuff. And after a little while, my high school band started having some gigs, and it was like, not only do I need an amp, but I need to like have better sounds than what's on this keyboard. So I got a little MIDI box, and that was my first MIDI device. And so I had to learn how MIDI works and be able to get the digital piano to talk to the little box. And, once I got that going, it was like, okay, well, these are pretty good, but the electric piano on here is still like bad. So I got myself this sophomore of college. I got myself a Wurlitzer electric piano, but of course that needs an amp. So I had to shop for tube amps and buy a Fender amp, and I needed a wah-wah pedal and a distortion pedal and a phaser. So I had to shop for pedals and understand them and buy cables and work out my signal flow and learn about gain structuring. And, so it was like that kind of stuff. But then, I did my first sort of studio recording senior year of high school, with a friend who had he was like an engineer, an older guy from my Unitarian church. And he worked at, what was the big tech company here in Portland? I can't remember what they were called. But anyway, he had built his own studio out of like a mixer that he built from scratch and Tascam reel to reel. Anyway, we did some recording there. And by the time I got into college, my freshman year college band, we wanted to make a record, and we did, hired a studio. And by the time we had spent all our money, we had like 4 tracks recorded, but barely mixed, and it didn't sound very good. And it was like, we spent all our money and we don't have a thing. And that was when it first started dawning in my mind that like, maybe I'm going to need to like approach this differently. And so, I did a couple of records that, first couple of years of college with like a couple other bands, with my bands, and, but it wasn't until maybe 3rd, 4th year of college that, the trio that I had, I had like a Fostex, like a 4-track cassette recorder, and I would use it to like, make demos and maybe record our rehearsals sometime. But I rented out this studio. I was like, we have these new songs. We need to like make recordings of them. I don't have any money. I can't pay the studio engineer for his time. But we had this rehearsal space. And so I just brought in the 3 SM57s that I had and took a line directly from the bass amp. And I mic'd up the drums with 2 mics and 1 mic on my Wurlitzer's little speaker and and I 4-tracked our little trio. Okay, so we did that, but then
it's the way it was done, man. Like that's like the OG, like how it got. That's how we did it. I mean, like that's like,
I'm like 21, and what am I gonna do? I'm a college student. I've been working at a coffee shop and playing in a couple of bands, but I don't really know what I'm doing. But I don't have enough money to like pay to make a record at a studio, so. Certainly not to do it right. It takes some time and hours and money, and that's not where we were. So I went to this recording studio and I hired this guy to take my 4-track recordings and like mix them down through his like nice studio. And by the time we got to the end of that process, I was like, "You're awesome. Will you teach me how all this stuff works?" And he was like, "Sure. If you'll like come in and like help me out with my sessions, I'll like tell you what I'm doing while I'm working." And I was like, there we go. Great. So I spent the next few years like on top of playing in bands and trying to survive, whatever, like maybe once every other month or so having a session where I'd go in and I'd wrap cables and he'd tell me about which mic he was going to use on which drum and why, and which preamp he was going to pair it with, and show me how the compressor worked, and like show me how the patch bay worked, and how a mixing console sums things, and like why you might want to put a compressor before or after it. Like, there's all these little things that never would have occurred to me, but someone has to show you, And so he showed me.
Absolutely.
and he went on to be a complete badass and is still a complete badass. He works with huge bands, and so it all has to start somewhere. But for me, it was all kind of a practical. It was like, I need to do this, and I can't do it the way they're doing it, so I got to figure out some other way.
I mean, well, first of all, it's the best way to learn is hands-on. Sporta Schneim, to learn the language, you got to break your teeth, right?
Certainly
Like you gotta, yeah, yeah, and I think it's really awesome and kind of silly on my part to overlook that the first thing to master is really your own kit. I recall having, we didn't have a whole bunch in the house, but we had a couple of guitars, and we had this an accordion and an old Casio keyboard that had a lot of synth sounds on it, and it's what got a lot of me and my siblings, interested in different kinds of music and sounds. But I
loved them.
Yeah, exactly. And I took a sideways path into the music scene by becoming a comedian. And this microphone is really all I've ever had to hold, and it never occurred to me that as a musician, I was thinking about that that big clunky Casio keyboard that we had in 1990, 4 or 5, and it's I was like, yeah, no, a bench, a seat, like all these little things that I think most folks, including myself, like today years old, it's a todation. We're starting it now. That I became more acutely aware of, right, you have to get to know your own setup and your own gear, and I should know that because I'm still getting used to the podcast setup in season 5. I'm still getting used to the transferring to this new platform, and to having the camera over here and the light there and the screen there, like we talked about.
This is definitely a business where enthusiasm really, really counts. Like,
you have to love it. You have to want to get after it. And, hearing you talk about spending, like, because, when I was in college, I was gigging 5 or 6 nights a week as a stand-up comedian. And I was fortunate enough to have a mentor who was also one of my teachers that semester, who was a voice actor. Shout out to Knut Horowitz. And he really taught me a ton of things, and I was lucky to have that in school in addition to the practical experience. But it's, again, not something that even really occurred to me as something that would need to be, taken care of at the level, like on the personal level, then at the band level, then in the studio level. And now let's fast forward a little bit, because I know there's so much in between. I'm very genuinely curious, taking a kind of a bigger leap forward. We have right over here behind me the album from 2015 from the Asher Fulero band, Catching Air. And it features a guy from a little band called Los Lobos, named Steve Berlin. And if you haven't listened to it, I mean, I've been teaching for several years, and I play it in the classroom all the time, and it's
love that.
It's a huge favorite, and it's one of the albums that when Hetty Waxstein said that they were gonna, and of course, major shout out to Chris and everybody in the group, check out his interview in season 3. When I heard that was going to be one of the releases, I was just filled with this sense of like, wow, like it's not just about, it's not just about the brand new bands that are coming out. It's about bringing back some of our real favorites that, have been, that have inspired us, in a lot of ways, and a lot of the different artists that have been reproduced in the record club since its inception. I would argue it's reproduced a number of artists that have influenced us all. John Craigie, Bela Fleck, like just people that are wonderful. I mean, and people who are inspiring today, like Kendra Morris, Sierra Farrell, the Polyrhythmics, just absolutely.
Say she.
Yeah, say she. Yes. Oh my God. Yes.
I heard about that band from Heady Wax Fiends, and then, a year later, they're everywhere. But Heady Wax Fiends was ahead of the curve on that one.
And they've been ahead of the curve so often, but this was a case where I was like, yeah, because I'm proud to have been a member of the record club since day one.
Oh, nice.
And this is a moment where I really felt like they caught up.
Mm.
And instead of getting ahead, and I felt and to be fair, I felt the same way when they reproduced Bela Fleck's Drive. That was, I mean, what an accomplishment to get that done. But it's so, I'm just so curious. What was your wax pressing experience like leading up to repressing catching or pressing Catching Air, and why Catching Air?
Yeah, I mean, again, I feel like I could write a book about this. There's so much good stuff in there, like just the history of how Catching Air itself came to be. I could regale you with stories about where that came from.
Well, tell us a little bit about the album. I mean, since we're here,
the short story of the album was just that, like, I had been trying for years to put a rock band together. There's a thing that, without getting too deep on it, there's like a thing that happens as a keyboard player when you're backing up a really good guitar player. When the guitar player can solo and tell a story with the solo, there's a thing that the backing support stuff can or should do or can do to like help it reach new heights, and not everyone does that. And cluing into the like how to be a background support player for the build of a solo is a whole theory to itself. And I had gone, as a keyboard player, gone through a series of guitar players trying to find and I feel like it's one of the things that I do well as a keyboard player is backing up a guitar soloist. I have a lot of history with jam bands and rock, and so like playing that role is something I'm good at. And I've moved through a bunch of guitar players over the course of a few years, trying to like, at first being a sideman for a couple of various guitar player bands, and then being like, oh, okay, I want to be the owner and creator of something. So finding some guitarists I could collaborate with to like create projects over probably 3 or 4 or 5 years, trying several different things and having them all kind of fizzle out. Eventually I got to a place where it was like, like I can kind of like do a good guitar solo. Maybe like the vision here is that like I can like be the soloist and hire a couple of guitar players to like play good rhythm stuff behind me. And so like I had made this album with this guy, Sean Leahy, from the Bay Area. He had been in a band called Isabella, and we met at High Sierra, and we worked together with Dave Brogan, and we had a band for a little while that we were trying to work. And then we made this record, just the two of us with a different backing band. And it went really well. The record was really good. But then when it came time to tour, Sean had some health problems. We weren't able to tour. And I just kind of got into this place of like, I need to like be in a little more control of like making this work. So I started a project with a couple local, people that I knew I knew Brett. I had been seeing him play and thought he was amazing and really wanted to work with him. He was at the time in a Fish tribute band, but they were like the best Fish tribute band around here. And he was like the best guy in the band. I just kind of was like, I want to work with him. So I started this band where I was kind of the lead, and it, over the course of a couple of years, morphed into this thing where it was like a 5-piece rock funk jam thing. And it was very similar to the rock thing I had been going for, but it sort of included a little more of the jazz funk, good foot, boogaloo, just sort of open-ended, funky one-chord jam thing that like a lot of the classic rocky stuff I'd been doing before that didn't really have. I think that it was kind of a profound shift for me personally to like move into this place of not just being the front man, but also being the guitar soloist. I had 2 guitarists in my, like, I took all the solos. I started developing this sort of guitar solo technique on the piano using the pitch bend and the distortion. After a little while, like it became its own thing.
Hold on. You developed your guitar solo technique on your keyboard.
Here, I got the keyboard plugged in. I can show you. So, like, if you take a Rhodes,
okay,
let's Rhodes here, right? Okay, so I take that Rhodes and I turn on like a phaser. Let's about a little chorus, okay, and then I crank up the distortion. Okay, right, and then I turn on the wah-wah pedal, so it's like a. Hold on, no, that's not. Correctly.
It sounded badass. I mean,
you just put a little bit of delay on it and a little bit of reverb, and you use your pitch bend, and all of a sudden it does this. Anyway, you get the idea.
yeah.
It's like almost any sound, if you put it through enough distortion and effects, and then you start pitch bending it and play like, I mean, it's like, it kind of sounds like it. So anyway, I started doing that and was like, I like this new direction. And so I decided to like, I'm going to actually sink a bunch of money into making a record. And I think it was about a $10,000 project, getting into the studio with Justin Phelps, who was like a sort of a well-known engineer. He's worked on, stuff with Mr. Bungle and just a huge long list of rock stars that he's worked with. And so we went into his studio. We spent a bunch of, time recording and hiring him to mix. We went to a high-end mastering. I think I sent it to John Cunaberti, who is like a legend in the scene. So, we spent a lot of money, and then I pressed 1,000 CDs, which, after about a year of playing shows and selling those CDs, we still had 900 of them. So it was like, CDs were on their way out in 2015, and I just wanted, to have physical. But in 2015, I had a few records, but I wasn't, I had my records. I don't think we'd split up my dad's records yet, and so I hadn't really taken the dive into being a hardcore record collector, and I certainly wasn't dropping thousands of dollars into pressing them at that point.
So up to 2015, now we're talking about 10 years ago when Catching Air came out, then there was no pressing of any records up until that point.
Not me. I had never pressed any of my music, for sure. I'd been I think I had done some cameos on a couple of records that got pressed. But I don't even think I had copies. I played on that Leftover Salmon record. And they offered me a record, and I wasn't collecting records at that point. So I was like, oh, what am I going to do with a record? Send me a CD.
Okay.
Eventually,
all right.
I got gifted one from the Heady Wax Fiends. I think was it Eric? I think one of them gifted me.
Shout out to the Fiends again.
Yeah,
just always
and so we continuing the story of Catching Air. Fast forward a bunch of years, and we're post COVID, and I've got this new band trio that I've been doing called Freedom, which is basically me and Brett, who is the bass player from Asher Fulero Band, who's just one of the best musicians I know. And Matt Butler, who's the conductor of the Everyone Orchestra, who I used to go see his band when I was 18, and he's a great drummer. So we brought him in, and just before COVID happened, we had been getting together at my house in between. I was on tour all year with Paul Gilbert, and in between we would get together and just come into my studio and improvise into the computer, and then hit, not even listen to it. We'd just record it and then go, okay, that was fun. And then COVID hit. And a couple of months into COVID, early 2020, I'm like, well, we got all these studio recordings with this trio. Anyway, not to get into Freedom, but we turned Freedom into this band, and Freedom is active. By 2020, late 21, early 22, we're trying to play some shows. And there's this new venue that had just opened in Portland called the Get Down, and we were all really excited to figure out how to play a show there. And so Matt, being the go-getter that he is, reached out to them about doing some shows. And they were like, okay. So they booked Freedom, and we did a residency there. It was like very early in there. You know, we had almost no one come, and boy, they were very kind to us. And
shout out to Blake. Check out his interview as well from season 3.
They're just some of the best people, and they really brought a lot of amazing opportunity and good vibes to our scene here in Portland. So we're really grateful for them. But so we connected with them, and I just sort of became friends with Blake, and he was, you know, telling me about, by this point I'm a heavy record collector, and he was telling me about Heady Wax Fiends, and me being the enterprising guy that I am, was like, well, a record club, I would love to like figure out how to have pressings of my records. Maybe we can connect with them. And so he connected me with Chris, and we talked a little bit about, like, you know, he's like, you've done a million things. Like, what would you want to do if we were going to do something? And I kind of was like, well, I have a lot of things, but I have this one record that's like really good, that like really probably deserves a pressing more than any of the rest of my stuff. And I sent it to him, and right away he was just like, oh yeah, this is perfect.
Yeah,
So,
I can see that being Chris's reaction. I mean, I remember hearing the album for the first time, and that was kind of my reaction to it as well. It's just one of those records that I feel like sticks with you, and I'm glad it stuck with you. Because it really was nice hearing about everything that went into it, because it does make a lot of sense. And I gotta ask, is that kind of where the name Catching Air comes from? Is that you kind of caught like this?
there's a whole funny story behind that. So
Right.
the album had a different name. There's a song on the album called Launchpad, and me, the concept was that this album was going to be like the launching pad for this band, that we were going to like finally create a sound, and I was going to put all this, you know, $10,000 budget, probably my biggest budget original project that I'd ever done. I'm like, I'm going to put all this budget and time and effort into making something that's like not just like a good record, but like feels like timeless and classic, you know? And I don't know exactly what that looks like, but I was just kind of trying to do my favorite stuff, my favorite kinds of things, you know, and stuff that we could do as a band. That, you know, we play at the Goodfoot, and we play in places where, you know, jam bands are and people like to dance. So there's things that we're doing to fit into that. And that affected what it was. But the goal was really to try to make something that, you know, didn't sound like 2015, but it just sounded like good music that you'd want to listen to. And you know, I think we managed to achieve that, but we definitely weren't in a place where we could, you know, I didn't have no management, no agency, no team at all. It was just me. So there's only so much anyone can do. I managed to get some good, you know, some good press locally and get some good shows up and down the West Coast. But, you know, we weren't selling a lot of tickets, and we weren't making a lot of money. And so it wasn't going to last super long. But the idea of Catching Air was that, like, essentially what happened was the album was called Launchpad. And then, like, I had given the graphic designer the title and was like, make something where she was Jamie Lee Myers, this amazing illustrator. Like, she does all sorts of art, but her work on Illustrator is amazing. And she was doing this, you know, vector art for us, and she put all this time into this graphic design for this album Launchpad. And then, like, maybe 2 weeks before we have to deliver the files to the CD printing place, someone comes to me and is like, one of my friends I had played it for, and was like, hey, you know that the very first Disco Biscuits album is called Launchpad? And we were like, oh no. And we were like, oh, we can't do that. So I was like, the nearest thing I could come up with to the concept was like, well, it's like she already had this picture of the, you know, the ship that's taking off. And so I was like, let's just call it Catching Air. It's like, you can still use the same art and it'll work.
I didn't even make that connection until you just said it, but it's so true. Oh man, what a good save. This is like, yeah, it's like, this is the same reason why I give my guests full edit over the interview, is because, like, maybe I'm not going to catch something, but somebody else is going to hear it and they're going to know. And that's why we got to get this done the right way.
Yeah, attention to detail is definitely one of my things.
It matters.
I mean, we could have just, not like anyone would really care except me, but once I knew, I was like, well, and it was like their first album and this is our first album. I was like, I just can't.
It's knowing half the battle goes both ways. Knowing is half the battle goes both ways.
Yes. So anyway, yeah, there you go. That's how it got its name.
So you have your own record label, an independent record label, Fulero Records, and I'm just kind of curious. The pressing, and correct me if I'm wrong, the pressing of Catching Air came out in 2023. Is that correct?
December 23. Yeah.
So end of 2023. So when was Fulero Records established? Was this before the release, or was it as the record was getting released? What's the timeline of that?
Yeah, it was like sort of all happened at the same time, interacting with each other. 2022, things were really busy with Freedom, and that's when I got connected with the Get Down and with Heady Wax Fiends, talking about what to do. And once we actually made the decision to make the pressing, like it was a year plus of process to get that all done. But I had been, for a couple of years at this point already, really wanting to get into record pressing. I have like 45 albums, but even back then it was like, 35 albums. And I'm looking at all these music being like, I see all these record collectors. This Heady Wax Fiends group seems really strong. These people are buying. And I'm going to record store day and seeing lines out the doors, people buying all these records, and no one's buying any CDs. And so I'm like, maybe if I press records, like I can not only have some sales, but actually get my music into people's collections.
I do got to say, one of the things I love the most about the Heady Wax Fiends Record Club is that it gets the albums into the hands of people who are going to spin those records. That is one of the greatest things about it to me, is that
honestly,
when those subscribers like me get our monthly record, we spin that shit right away. Like, that's not meant to be looked at behind glass. That's meant to be put on the table and spun round and round. Like that's what it's there for.
I think they underestimate their own power as distributors, honestly, and maybe even go so far as to say tastemakers at this point. So
they're a genuine label. I think they're really so much more. There's so much more than I think they give themselves credit for, and I think that. And I think this gets back to what you were talking about in this process of establishing Fulero Records, while at the same time kind of letting Catching Air catch some air for release on vinyl.
I didn't have a label. I didn't have any, I would put out records digitally. So I had this sort of Bandcamp digital label with all the artists, and I have a label account. And it was just Asher Fulero Music, and here's all my records. And I knew that if I was going to press records, I wanted to like present it as a thing. And I realized that I didn't have a formal music company, LLC, created. So I had just been working independently as like a, independent contractor. So I was like, okay, let's like change this into being something that I own, that really represents myself and is a place for me to, do these things, this vinyl journey that I kind of want to try out. So I actually hadn't finalized the deal with Heady Wax Fiends yet when I started doing it. So it was like January 2023. I founded the LLC. But a couple of months before that, I actually borrowed $1,500 from Jeremy Sievert. Shout out Jeremy Sievert, who loaned me an upfront fee to get my first pressing started. So I got the Interconnected album was an album of library soundtrack music that I had made that I really loved, and had really great cover art. And so I was like, this will make a great first pressing. So I got that pressing going, and then I released it. It came out in like February 2023. And then, I had done the Dab Records album with Emancipator. So I had a couple vinyl related releases by this point. This was the first one that said Asher Fulero ever. So I had this new label, And so that was the first one. And then the right at that time, Heady Wax Fiends came back and were like, we want to do the project with you. So that became the second one. And then Worlds I had been working on for a few years, and that became the third one. But I've put out other albums in there that aren't getting pressed to vinyl. It's too expensive to press everything I do to vinyl.
Sure.
If I sold 300 or 400 of them every time, then sure, I'd do press everything. But it's like it's not selling that many yet. So that's the goal, is to build. And Heady Wax Fiends has been huge for me for that. And most of my sales go to Fiends, honestly.
I mean, the key word there is yet. And that's the thing is, we've definitely been seeing, like you mentioned, a vinyl resurgence. People are definitely paying a lot more attention to the medium, which I think is wonderful.
Yeah.
And it's really great to hear, though, that even prior to the Heady Wax Fiends official, you kind of had this within yourself to be like, okay, let's formalize, let's get this done, let's have it be in my name, let's let it be proper. I remember when I had that feeling about Secondhand Talent for the first time, and realizing like, hey, like I want this to be something that's actually, like on paper and real. And it's wild. And it's a little surreal. And I gotta ask, how did it feel to have that first record pressed, and then the second and the third, and see your name on it holding a piece of wax?
Yeah, each of the three Fulero Records pressings has been hugely gratifying in different ways. The first one, just because so awesome to see and hold it, and also they were really pretty. The green ones they're really nice, and the big artwork. It was just the first thing, and everything about that feels good. And then the second one was like, it was my first time doing real like lacquering mastering. The previous one had been a DMM cut. I don't know if you know the difference between those, but
I was gonna ask for if you don't mind, just a little bit, kind of. We don't need to go into what DMM mastering is, but for our
there's a few involved in taking the thing that you cut into and then like pressing that into something that you can press records out of. And the DMM cut is just a way of it, rather than cutting into like a soft lacquer and then covering it with metal and making a revert. Like there's a whole process that the DMM cut takes a big chunk of metal and cuts into it with a hard thing. I think it's copper. And then they just create out of that. And so it's like instead of 2 or 3 steps, it's like 1 step.
Right.
So it doesn't sound, it's got some trade-offs sound-wise, but it's also got a bunch of trade-offs financially and in high detail delivery of transients. Which, anyway, not to get too deep on stuff like that, but
sure.
The lacquering process is more expensive and it takes longer, but arguably sounds better. So the second one was my first time doing the lacquering process, and we got to do really cool, multiple variants of colors and the gatefold packaging and all this stuff that was really great about that. And we used a local company in Portland, so getting to keep it local was really great. Then the third one, I got to go to Gotta Groove, which is, their legend. So I got to have wax mages and, there's like just a lot of really fun possibilities in the world of vinyl pressing. And it's been fun getting to explore those.
And I don't know if there are still copies available. I know you have an album out for pre-order at the time of this taping. If there are still copies available when this episode airs, we will put the link in the description. Don't you worry about that, folks. But outside of, seeing your name on a record, what is this journey into production opened up for you, just as a musician and as a performer, when it comes to breaking that fourth wall with fans in a different way? After so many years doing what you do, has this changed the way that you interact with fans now?
Yeah, I mean, I think taking the time to organize my own world into something a little more official makes people take it seriously in a different way. So there's that. It's also, how do I put this? Like, one of the things that's always been kind of difficult about taking me on and working with an artist is that I do so many different things. You know, on top of having Asher Fulero band for a lot of years, I was doing Halo Refuser, which is like polar opposite musically, like electronic EDM club music with just me and a laptop and a bunch of effects. And like, you know, the audiences who liked Halo Refuser and the audiences who liked Asher Fulero band did not like the other project. And it was like one's a dubstep project and the other is like jazz funk. Like there's some crossover, but back in 2015, like not as much. And at least maybe not for me, at least. So one of the great things about having the record label is sort of this unifying feature of taking all the various things that I'm doing and making them understandable or having some sort of frame of reference for it all. I feel like it's easier to grab onto as an artist.
Well, yeah, it's much easier. I feel like when something is branded in that way, it's a lot easier to digest if it's a little bit different than another product that's still branded under the same warehouse.
Right. I mean, my reference for this is always Frank Zappa, which is, you know, I don't necessarily try to sound like Frank Zappa, but what I want is the ability to just, no matter what kind of music it is, I can just put my name on it and people are going to know it's going to be high quality, whatever it is. I mean,
that it's going to be, and that it's going to be you. And
right.
That's, I think, another thing that I really appreciate about your music is that, similar to Fran, you know, I grew up in a Zappa household. My mother is I have her beloved copies of Live at the Roxy and a few others, and it doesn't matter what album, you know it's him.
Yeah.
And it's really nice to, and that's the thing, is that like he hopped around genres as well. He made Plastic People just to make fun of the fact that songs could be made that were similar to others. That Plastic People, like he just made that to mess with record labels. Like, but like everything, no matter what genre, was uniquely Zappa-esque and had that unique flavor to it, and was framed by, you know, Barking Pumpkin, you know, in that way, in kind of a way Fulero does for you, which is pretty sweet.
Yeah, I've gone back retroactively and taken all the projects and albums that are like on my label and given them like numbers, like Zappa did with his, you know. It's like I'm inspired by that because I have treated my life sort of similarly in the same way that he treated his, which is that, you know, you make every album as great as you can. You make every album as you can, but you don't sit on it and like tweak it for too long. You just got to get it out, because at a certain level, it's like a time capsule or a journal entry of like where you're at that year or that at that moment. And the idea is to be able to look back over the course of 30 or 40 years and see the storyline, and not just like be great from day one and just be great the whole time. There's got to be like an arc to the story. And that's been my goal. I call it my audio journal. And that's what it is. It's like I can look back and see where I was in 1999 or in 2005 or in 2010 or in 2015. And the albums that I do represent where I was then. And you can see me getting better and expanding and exploring and learning and applying. And that's for me, like that's what I look for in an artist, is what I like about Frank. It's what I like about Pink Floyd. It's what I like about, you know, Radiohead. There's a million artists that have this arc of story of where they started and where they went. And that, to me, anyone can make one good record. Almost anyone, but having a consistent storyline that holds your attention and somehow feels consistent over the course of 20 years is amazing.
Speaking of which, actually, as at the time of this taping, a couple days ago, I saw Humphreys McGee for the first time in 14 years, and holy shit, I've been seeing that band for over 20 years, and that might have been the best Humphreys show I've ever seen.
Yeah.
They just absolutely, at the Riverside in Milwaukee, they just absolutely burned the house down. And it's kind of nuts that it's been 14 years and it's still that, like, it feels fresh, but the songs that they played also represent those moments in time, and it's taking that and making it into now. That's like one of those incredible feats of artistry that is rarely accomplished, I think,
Yeah. I
visibly
mean,
anyway.
they're very inspiring. And, I think I'm a lifer. I've been doing music my whole life, and I always will. And I gravitate towards other people who are lifers. And so, an artist shows up and makes a really great record, and I'm like, cool, that's a great start. Like, let's see where they are in 5 years if they're still making great records and expanding and growing. And you would be, I mean, you wouldn't be because you've been around long enough to see it, but people I think would be surprised to know how many bands that or artists that get chosen and lifted up and focused on and spotlighted fold after a couple of years, and those artists go away, and I've seen it happen so many times, and
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm not about to sit here and name names, but yeah, there's a laundry list. I mean, I don't want to even begin to start saying which bands because it doesn't matter.
even three
Um,
albums, it's like that's a nice run, but it's just start. you know
there's being present, and then there's endurance, and then there's endurance, and then there's legacy, and in between there's stability.
Yeah.
And if you don't have that endurance to reach stability, you'll never hit legacy.
And a
And
lot
oh
of the
god,
variables in that artists don't have control over.
mm,
um
very
a
true.
lot of it's not really necessarily in the someone in the band dies or becomes an addict, or the two of the band decide to quit and it's never really the same, or they get clean and then their albums aren't as good, or they after 5 or 6 years they have kids and they can only do weekends, and it's like,
I can think of a number of bands in all of those columns,
yeah,
and it's really,
including myself, honestly. I mean, like, we all
well,
older.
there's a truth to that, but there, I recall something, some hearsay said on some secondhand words said on Secondhand Talent, somebody paraphrasing someone else who said, they run a studio and they were asked, well, how do you stay out of the band's drama? The ones that come through every day. And his response was, well, I see every band twice, on the way up and on the way down.
Yeah.
And, each time they're in my studio. So everything in between is just, that arc that you were just describing, that happens. And it just, for some, yeah, for some people, the angles are just steeper than others, and that's all it is.
Yeah, amen to that. And the truth is that I think a lot of crew and engineers and support network people, like, they experience that too. Someone starts off helping promote local shows, and then they get drawn into a local booking agency, and then they're doing a good job and they get picked up by a national booking agency, and then they're doing a great job there representing some big acts, and then something happens and they have some kids and they need to back off, and they end up just working with a local act at a local venue again. And it's like, on both sides of the stage there are arcs of rising and falling.
Yeah, I mean, there's a former guest of the show, who, started out doing light design and touring with a lot of bands, and now, gets to choose which bands he tours with. And I think to be able to attain that level and have a team that you trust to send out there and operate on the road for all these great acts, and then choose who you want to be on the road with and manage your time like that to achieve that level,
Yeah.
again, requires all of those steps that we just illustrated. Before we go, I would be remiss, to not in a secondhand talent interview to not ask you about your YouTube studio music experience
Yeah.
and what kind of led to that path and what that's been like.
Oh my. Definitely a really interesting topic to talk about. It goes back to this. I have like a musical adage that I tell whenever I'm talking to a young player or something, and there's like it sounds obvious and silly, but the adage goes like this: you never know who it's going to be.
Mm.
Never know who it's going to be.
It's the same in stand-up. You never know who's in the audience. That's yes.
That's right. And so in this case, it was a guy in the Bay Area scene who played in this band with a guy who he was a guitar player. But the drummer in this band had done graphic design for us. He was like friends with a SF friend. And so I had this band called Surrounded by Ninjas, and we hired this guy to do graphic design for a couple of tour posters, maybe 2003, 2004. He did a great job. It was awesome. Later on, he went to play drums in this band, and we ended up at the same festival a couple of times, and I met the other members of his band. And one of them was just this guy who was, we had this nice rapport when we'd see each other, and that was it. Fast forward 7 or 8 years, and I haven't like heard from them in a while. We're just running in different scenes and whatever. But then I get a call, or maybe it was a email, I can't remember, but I get a message from him out of the blue, just being like, "Hey, I don't know if you remember me, but and it's like these are the best things when they're like that. And so it was like, I don't know
for
if you
sure.
Yeah. Now I work at Google, and I'm on the YouTube. I work at YouTube. And we're doing this audio library project where we're commissioning composers to create content for our library so that we don't have people making YouTube videos can use music without us having all of these copyright infringement problems. We'll just create our own library, and anyone can use music from it. And we'll just it'd be cheaper for us to spend a few $1 million doing that than to continue dealing with all of the
Wow.
And so he just remembered that I made music. He probably had seen some of my Halo Refuser stuff, and he just was like, I think you'd be a good fit for making content for our library. And they just started sending me big checks to make random. They don't even, it would just be like, we need 20 pieces in like down-tempo electronic or ambient new age neoclassical. And it'd be like, okay. And I would just make a bunch of stuff. That essentially, I'd get upfront commission fees for that. And that was how I built my studio and funded a lot of my life. And then also they allow me to, even though they retain all the rights to the ownership of it, they allow me to upload it for streaming. And so I make continued streaming income on it. Now that I've monetized my YouTube channel, they linked the official audio library videos to my
man.
And so my page went from being like 2,500 subscribers to being 25,000 subscribers in maybe 6 months. It was incredible. So they really, Google YouTube has really helped me out. I mean, there's a lot of questionable stuff about their, multinational existence, but
sure, but strictly from a musical perspective, like, how does it feel knowing that your music is being used out there and is kind of in this archive that just is out there for creators? Well, we're probably going to use some of that audio for promotion videos for this episode.
It has been by far the most high profile thing I've ever done. I mean, it is like hundreds of thousands of people from around the world use this audio library every day. I'm getting messages on YouTube like, "Hi, I live in Sri Lanka and I love this song," or, "Hey, can I get the sheet music to this? I'm in Madagascar." Or, like, it's just literally all over the world. Like, it's amazing. So that has been, it's funny because when I first got the gig, I have a friend who's like a cousin of an ex-partner who's like a famous musician from the 70s.
Spaceballs relationship. My brother's
Yeah,
father's sister's uncle's mother. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
But he's
yeah.
like he's a legend in the scene, and he was kind of like, I don't know if this is really going to be good for you to be doing this music where you're giving up all the rights to it and whatever. And I kind of was like, I agree. It's like it's maybe dangerous. And he was like, well, we'll just see. And I have to say that after like about 7 or 8 years of doing it, it has been kind of one of the best things in my whole career. So I'm all about it.
I mean, look, hey, if it works, it works. And you know what? You're contributing your music to the work of a lot of people. It's exposing people all around the world to your music. And for nothing else, that's an awesome thing. Asher Fulero, thank you so much for being on the show. And you want to play us out?
A little. I got the piano right here.
Play us out.
It's still distorted.
Folks, this has been Steiner with another episode of Secondhand Talent. And we will see you next Wednesday. That's a podcast. All right. Thanks so much.
That was fun.
That was a lot of fun, man.